When the United States and Israel struck Iran in early 2026, Tehran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz. For global shipping, the world's most critical oil artery came to a dead halt. This map shows why the closure hit India hard. 90% of India's liquefied petroleum gas, fuel for millions of kitchens, must pass through this narrow passage. When the Iranian Navy blocks the strait, the fuel supply stops overnight. The empty cylinders you see here became the defining image of the crisis. Black market prices for cooking gas hit 4,000 rupees. Restaurants reverted to burning firewood, and the sudden fuel shortage began driving a wave of reverse migration as workers abandoned the cities. In less than a week, a distant military strike transformed into a domestic survival crisis. It ultimately proved that a nation's supply lines are only as secure as the physical choke points they must travel through. New Delhi's initial strategy was traditional diplomatic neutrality. By refusing to condemn either side, India hoped to stay out of the crossfire and wait for the hostility to subside. But traditional diplomatic neutrality provided absolutely no protection on the water. Iranian naval forces fired on and seized Indian-bound vessels, leaving assets like this naval warship effectively sidelined while Indian merchant ships were targeted. The government faced intense domestic criticism for its perceived paralysis, especially as arch-rival Pakistan successfully positioned itself as the primary mediator between Washington and Tehran to negotiate a ceasefire. India's standing as a regional security provider was under threat. To fix the economy, restore geopolitical influence, and secure supply lines, the nation needed to find a new, stable partner in the Middle East. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival in Abu Dhabi in May 2026 carried this level of urgency. While it was framed as a brief stopover on a European tour, the meeting was actually a high-stakes emergency mission to secure India's energy future. UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan held the two things India needed most: massive liquid capital and a direct, reliable source of energy. The resulting deal was massive. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company agreed to store 30 million barrels of crude oil directly in India's strategic petroleum reserves, utilizing the industrial storage facilities you see here. They also signed an agreement for long-term, uninterrupted LPG supplies. This was a targeted fix designed to flood the Indian market with cooking gas and end the domestic shortage once and for all. By placing these massive physical reserves on Indian soil, the UAE is now actively underwriting India's internal stability. This wasn't a simple purchase of oil. The two nations began integrating their state machinery through a strategic framework for defense industrial collaboration. India is merging its manufacturing infrastructure with Emirati financial capital to produce a self-reliant military base, starting with the joint production of drones and missiles. On the coast, the pact created a massive ship repair cluster in Vadinar. By involving Dubai's Dry Docks World and the Cochin shipyard, India is building the infrastructure needed to repair the very vessels that were vulnerable during the Hormuz closure. This physical integration is backed by $5 billion in investment from UAE entities into Indian infrastructure and major banking institutions. Abu Dhabi is now a foundational investor, its capital deeply integrated into the machinery of India's sovereign defense. For the financial power represented by this Abu Dhabi skyline, the benefit is clear: a secure, long-term structural role in a fast-growing consumer market. For India, the primary benefit is crisis-proofing. These state-backed supply lines ensure that even if the Middle East faces another conflict, India's domestic economy remains insulated. Both nations have moved away from a reliance on open, globalized trade. Instead, they've built a direct, fortified bypass around the unreliable bottlenecks of the world's oceans. The 2026 crisis taught both capitals that in a volatile world, security requires more than just trade. It requires intertwining sovereign interests through physical assets. In a globalized economy, diplomatic neutrality is an empty concept if you do not control the physical supply chains that feed your population. The New Delhi-Abu Dhabi partnership demonstrates how nations can secure their interests in a world where broad coalitions often fail under pressure. Geopolitical power is moving away from broad, passive coalitions. In their place, we are seeing the rise of hyper-integrated bilateral links, like this one between India and the UAE. The 2026 energy panic resulted in a level of structural integration that tethers South Asian and Middle Eastern security tighter than any diplomatic treaty.